to the live stream on the fake one, just so we can test it. Even if I wanted to. Love move first. What's that far behind? This will get deleted after editing. That's in case I cuss, you guys can kill it. It's the TV delay, you know? Like when you hear an NBA player drop a bomb and how do they edit that so fast? Oh, it's delayed. I forget live TV. It's like 30 seconds to a minute delay. Woo! It's bright, baby. Y'all are just silhouettes back there. Love move first. Find my way to you. Even in a kind of distance. Even if I wanted to. Hey, turn that off. You didn't go the distance, even if I wanted to. At least when I'm preaching right now, the camera won't vibrate. Did you connect with Jim to bring those platforms this week? Have you? I would talk to Josh and see, because he said they were ready. He just needed a time to drop them off. He has a key fob, so he can, but he might need a hand bringing them in. Yeah, because Josh told me Monday that they were done, that he just needed to arrange a drop-off time.
Yeah, I mean,
Because that'll be helpful, right?
yeah, tomorrow I could probably, I've got something in the morning, but it's, tomorrow afternoon I could probably be here. Yeah.
I mean, he might be able to bring them up today before Josh and y'all leave, too. You find my way to you. You didn't know the difference. Gotta go pick up my glasses. Today I get my glasses, Costco. I had to get glasses, Jason. Yeah, I don't need them really, but my left eye is bad on its own distance. It's blurry. And they say my right eye will go bad if I don't. Yeah. But I turned 40 tomorrow and I get glasses today. Isn't that crazy? Yeah. My birthday present to myself. Costco. Y'all ready? Matt, good? You staying back there?
Yeah, I'll stay back here.
Okay.
You guys good?
All right. Are you going to be between all three? Okay. What? I heard that. Does that come through? The email notification? All right. Well, good. No, not good morning. Justin, don't use this part. Well, welcome to Adventure Church Online. So glad that you are tuning in today and a part of our experience. We are in week 2 of our King David series. Want to encourage you, if you missed last week, go back, watch it, catch up, and then make sure you're following along every week of this series, as I believe it will be very helpful for you. Have you ever known someone or heard about someone and just totally kind of shocked, surprised by some of the harmful decisions that they are making, that they made, or maybe they're still kind of living out those decisions, and you kind of stand back from the situation, and maybe again it's someone you really love or care about, or a friend of a friend, and just knowing who they are, that they kind of make a decision, you kind of just stand back, scratch your head, and wonder, how could they do that? How could they make such a bad decision? I thought they were better than that, stronger than that. I thought they had more character than that. And I think we've all known someone, and maybe even ourselves, where we can really realize that no one is exempt from this type of behavior, from making that type of decision. That probably at some point in our lives we've all reacted or responded to a situation that was extremely out of character. And there are moments in our lives that even the most dedicated and disciplined people can crash through the moral and ethical boundaries that we've put in place. And through many years of pastoring now, of counseling people, of walking with people through some of these decisions and regrets, I've found that people's greatest regrets seem to happen at a time when they're either angry, afraid, or alone. That the times people have made the decisions that they wish they could go back and change, that when that has happened, they were either angry, afraid, or alone. You see, when we feel this way, when we're angry, when we're afraid, when we're alone, we feel compelled in that moment to do something, to really do anything that will help change the way we feel, to make us not feel afraid, to make us not feel like we're all alone, to make us not feel angry anymore. And when we respond from that emotional place, in that mindset, things usually tend to get worse. Things usually tend to get more complicated, really the exact opposite of what we're wanting. King David was described by God as a man after his own heart, a man after God's heart. But he was not exempt from failures. In fact, he had two colossal failures. The first one was when he was king. And this was a time when he was alone. And he should have been at war with his soldiers, but he was alone. He falls into temptation, has an affair with a woman, which leads to a whole other chain of events, including murder. Colossal failure. Another failure happened before he was king, when he was 22 years old. And it's not he's not as known for this failure. It's not one that we often remember or reference in David's story, but I believe it's probably the most significant failure of David's life. And today we're going to look at that failure and what we can learn from it to make sure we don't repeat the same mistake that David did. So again, last week we talked about David's probably most familiar and infamous story when he kills Goliath. And instantly David becomes famous. He has hero status among the people of Israel. They are singing songs about him and immediately has power and influence. And King Saul, who was an extremely insecure king, sees David's new influence and newfound power and begins to see David as a threat to his kingdom and his plans. And so Saul's always trying to figure out a way to kind of rein David in, to control David. And so he offers David one of his daughters to marry him. And David said, I am from a humble family. I cannot marry the king's daughter. And so remember David's humble confidence, this humility that he had was even more endearing to some of these people. And so whatever Saul tried to do, he couldn't kind of rein David in. But then David actually falls in love with one of Saul's daughters. And her name is Michal. And then he becomes friends with the king's son, Jonathan. And they're like best friends, like super tight. And Jonathan is super loyal to David. His daughter, Michal, King Saul's daughter, Michal, who David marries, is super loyal to David. So now David is a part of the king's family, and he has not only loyalty from the people, but now loyalty from within Saul's own family. And so for 7 years, Saul goes back and forth kind of with his feelings about David, where he likes him and then he doesn't. And multiple times he gives in to his insecurity and tries to kill David in battle, but it backfires because God was with David and was giving him success in everything that he did. So David is becoming even more successful and gaining more influence. And finally, one night, after David had skipped the family dinner, which was a huge thing in that context and that culture of what was going on, David misses dinner, his seat's empty at the table, and Saul finally loses it altogether. And in 1 Samuel chapter 20, verse 30 through 33 is where we pick up this story, and it says this: So Saul's anger flared up at Jonathan, David's best friend, Saul's son, and said to him, you are a son of a perverse and rebellious woman. Just right there. I mean, Saul's kind of losing it, right? And I don't know if David's mom was at the table. Let's just hope that she wasn't. But he says this, he says, don't I know that you have sided with the son of Jesse to your own shame and to the shame of the mother who bore you? As long as this son of Jesse lives on earth, David lives on earth, neither you nor your kingdom will be established. He's saying, you're next in line, Jonathan. And if David keeps gaining power and influence, he's going to step into your place in this kingdom. He said, now send someone to bring David to me. He must die. Why should David be put to death? What has he done? Jonathan asked his father. But Saul hurled a spear at him to kill him, tried to kill his own son. Then Jonathan knew that his father intended to kill David. So Jonathan, again, his loyalty was with David. He goes to David, tells David, hey, you got to get out of town. My dad, King Saul, has literally lost it. He's going to kill you. You got to get out of here. So David is 22 years old, and suddenly his influence within the kingdom, his fame, his place within Saul's family, right? All of a sudden, it's gone. And David, all of a sudden, feels alone. He's been abandoned. He's isolated. He's on his own. He's angry. He had literally risked his life numerous times for Saul, had given everything he had to invest in Saul's kingdom, to build up Saul, and Saul's own insecurity keeps getting in the way of what David is trying to do from a sincere place and sincere heart. And now he's afraid. So he's alone, he's angry, and he's afraid because the king literally wants his life. And David did what a lot of us do when we find ourselves alone, angry, or afraid. He panicked. He panicked. And it's easy for us to sit back and go, well, why? David, you killed Goliath. God has always taken care of you. You are a fearless warrior. Why are you afraid? Why would you run? Why would you panic? But maybe you've done the same thing. Maybe you were alone. Maybe you got angry. Maybe you were afraid. And now that you look back at some of the decisions you made and you ask yourself the same question, why did I do that? Why did I buy that? Why did I cheat? Why did I leave? Why did I quit? And you, like David, probably panicked. So David is on the run, and 1 Samuel 21, it says that David went to Nob and to Ahimelech, the priest, and Ahimelech trembled when he met him and asked him, so when he sees David, why are you alone? Why is no one with you? So David's running for his life. This is a priest that David had gone to before to seek counsel, to seek help. And he asked him, why are you alone? David would never travel alone. He was at the top, tier of the kingdom. He always had an entourage. He always had support. He always had his soldiers with him. And David answers him and he says, the king sent me on a mission and said to me, no one is to know anything about this mission I am sending you on. As for my men, I have told them to meet me at a certain place. And in David's panic, he lies. Why did he lie? Because he was afraid. Because he was reacting or taking action from a place of fear. And that lie, that little, what seems to be insignificant lie, would end up costing Ahimelech and his entire family their lives. But more on that later. It goes on in verse 3, he says, now then, what do you have on hand? Give me 5 loaves of bread or whatever you can find. But the priest answered David, I don't have any ordinary bread on hand. However, there is some consecrated bread here, provided the men have kept themselves from women. And so in this day and time, they would offer bread to God. And, surprisingly enough, the next day the bread was still there. God didn't need it to eat, but it was consecrated bread. So they would offer it to God, and then the next day they would eat it, but you had to be consecrated yourself, which would meant you had to be pure before the Lord, and unclean in this context meant that you hadn't had any sexual relationship with any women. And so the priest says, hey, I have some consecrated bread, but David, you know that you can't eat this bread unless you are clean, that you are kept yourselves from women. And then David lies again and says, yeah, I'm good to get the food. He wasn't even trusting God for his basic necessities, his basic needs of food and shelter at this point. He is in a complete panic. And again, we get the opportunity to look at this story thousands of years later and to get to have the context and to look at David and how he's reacting and have that, what is he doing? What happened to Psalm 25, David, that we talked about last week, where in Psalm 25, he says, in you, Lord my God, I put my trust. Guide me in your truth. He's lying. Teach me, God, for you are my God and my Savior, and my hope is in you all the day long. What happened to this David? In verse 8, he says that David asked Ahimelech, he says, don't you have a spear or sword here? I haven't brought my sword or any other weapon because the king's mission was too urgent. So this is where Ahimelech is probably starting to figure out something's off here, that you left in such a hurry that you have no men with you. You have no food, you have no supplies, and you didn't even bring your weapon? You're traveling alone without your weapon? What is going on? And so, through this amazingly strange order of events, he asked him for a weapon, the priest. And he's a priest. He's like, this is like a church. We don't have like a surplus of weapons here. And Ahimelech says, the only sword that we have is the one that you used to kill Goliath, that you gave us as a way to dedicate your victory to God. So at that place, David again was giving God all the glory, all the credit. He takes the sword that he killed Goliath with and presents it to the temple, to the priest, and dedicated it to the Lord. He says, this was the Lord's victory, and let this serve as a reminder of what God did when the giant was slayed. And so David, it's almost like he hops into a DeLorean and is taken back 7 years. He's 22, 7 years, to where he's 15 years old, to the very moment that catapulted him into his fame. And he's standing there, seeing himself slay Goliath, the giant. And then this sword that he dedicated to God to give to the high priest is brought back to him. The sword that he used to slay the giant. And this should be the moment that David is reminded of God's faithfulness and his favor on his life, that he doesn't have to be afraid, that he's not alone. And he looks right past it. Because when we're alone and we're angry and we're afraid, we often forget the faithfulness of God in our past. Let's go back and listen to the faith that David had just 7 years earlier as a 15-year-old boy when he approaches the giant that he is being reminded of in this moment. 1 Samuel 17, 45 through 47, it said, David replied to Goliath, you have come to meet me with sword, spear, and javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of the heaven's armies, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. And so David didn't even have a sword or a weapon besides a slingshot when he faced Goliath, and now he's asking for a sword, that he needs protection because his faith isn't in the Lord in this moment. He says to Goliath, today the Lord will conquer you, and I will kill you and cut off your head. And I will give the dead bodies of your men to the birds and the wild animals, and the whole world will know that there's a God in Israel. And everyone assembled here will know that the Lord rescued his people, but not with sword or spear, not with a weapon. I don't need a weapon, because the Lord is fighting this battle. And the Lord will give you to us. So what happened to this David? What happened to this kid who was 15? Who ran towards danger, not away from it, who didn't even need a weapon, whose confidence and faith was so strong in the Lord that he didn't even need a weapon. Well, now David is facing even bigger giants than Goliath. Fear, anger, loneliness, and these three giants have the potential to cause us to forget the faithfulness of God in our own lives, just as David did. So the priest replied to David, here's the sword of Goliath the Philistine, whom you killed in the valley of Elah. It is here, that is wrapped in a cloth. If you want it, take it. There's no sword here but that one. And David said, there is none like it. Give it to me. And David literally takes matters out of God's hands into his very own, because that is what fear does. It's what anger does. It's what loneliness does. We take matters into our own hands. And here in this place in David's story today, I think we all can find ourselves. That when we need God the most, is when we are most tempted to run away, to take matters into our own hands, and to opt for things that never worked before and do them again, and put ourselves in a place where we make decisions that lead to extreme regret. And here's what we think, and here's what David thought. If God were with me, this wouldn't be happening to me. If God was with me, then this wouldn't be happening. You see, it's easy to trust God when we have nothing to trust him with and nothing to trust him for. That's where David was when he was 15. It's easy when we have nothing to lose and everything to gain to go all in our relationship with God. It's easy when we're on the mountaintop to give and to serve and to pray and to be faithful to God. But it's a lot more difficult when we're in the valley, when we're afraid, when we feel alone, when we're angry. So David takes Goliath's sword into his own hands, and he does what is really the unthinkable. He literally goes back to the city of Gath, where Goliath was from, to the Philistine king, and asks to be a part of their army, and says, let me fight for you now. My people have turned on me. Let me fight for you. And the king goes, what? All of his soldiers are like, what? You're David. They sing songs about you. You killed Goliath. You actually have the Goliath sword, and you're trying to trick us. You're spying on us. And David realizes he's put himself in another bad situation and begins to literally fake being insane so that they will kind of cast him out of their presence. And they do. And then he's on the run for his life again. And David goes to this cave to hide out and finds himself there all alone. He spends some time there, and some people find out that he's there and come to him and try to bring him back to his senses, to get him to a stable place. And when he finally does come back to his own country, he talks to another prophet and says, I need to begin to seek God's will for my life again. But the problem is that the damage of his disobedience was already done. You see, when David was with Ahimelech, so was Doeg. And this was Saul's chief shepherd. He was kind of there hiding out. And he overhears this conversation that David had, getting the sword and getting the food and where he was going. And he goes back to Saul and tells Saul what happened. And in chapter 22, verses 9 through 11, it says, but Doeg, who was standing with Saul's officials, said, I saw the son of Jesse, David, come to Ahimelech at Nob. Ahimelech inquired of the Lord for him, and he also gave him provisions and the sword of Goliath the Philistine. Then the king sent for the priest, Ahimelech, and all of his men of his family to come with him, who were priests at Nob, and they all came to the king. So Saul says this. So he says to him, he says, listen, you're conspiring against me with David. Why are you doing this? Why did you side against me? You've conspired against me. Verse 13. You've rebelled against me. You're lying. Why should I allow you to do this? And Ahimelech answers the king. He says, who of all of your servants is as loyal as David? The king's son-in-law, captain of your bodyguard and highly respected in your household. Was that day the first time I inquired of God for him? Of course not. David has come to me many times. Let not the king accuse your servant of any of his father's family, for your servant knows nothing at all about this whole affair. So Ahimelech's going, I don't know what you're talking about. David must have been lying to me. I don't know what you're saying. And King Saul, again, insecure, jealous, in a rage, says, you will surely die, Ahimelech, and your entire family. And then Saul orders all of the priests in the entire village of Nob, 85 of them, and then all of the men, women, and children and animals to be killed. And very few escaped the slaughter of King Saul. But one of them was Ahimelech's son. And he goes to David. And he tells David what's happening. And David responds to him in 1 Samuel 22, verse 22. And he says, I am responsible for the death of your whole family. And David was not just responsible for that family, really the death of the entire village. Hundreds of people die because of David's disobedience and deceitfulness. And in that moment, David didn't trust God. He took matters into his own hands, and not only did it cost him, it cost others dearly. You see, taking matters and things into your own hands feels good in the moment, but it never ends good. There's going to be a time in all of our lives where we find ourselves in similar situations. Maybe right now you find yourself in a situation, in a season where you're feeling alone. You're afraid. You're angry at some things that are happening and some things people have done. And I want you to ask yourself a question today. What is your loneliness, anger, or fear causing you to consider that you've never considered before? Relationally, financially, physically, an old habit that you have conquered for years, and all of a sudden you're thinking about going back to that drug or that alcohol or that woman, that man, to try to fill the void and to ease the pain that you're feeling right now. So what is your loneliness or anger or fear causing you to consider? And then who is your loneliness, anger, or fear causing you to consider that you know you shouldn't consider? You know you have no business emailing them. You know you should end that Facebook chat conversation, instant messaging that's been happening. You know you shouldn't be reaching out and contacting them, and you have no business at doing that and engaging in that, but all of a sudden it's now an option for you. You're considering some of these things. And then I want you to ask this: who besides you do your considerations put at risk? And I think that answer is the same for all of us. It's the people you love the most and the people who love you the most. And some of you know exactly what I'm talking about because you've lived through it with your parents or with a spouse where they made decisions that had ramifications far beyond themselves. There was collateral damage. And so today, before you do what you feel like doing, reacting from an emotional place, I want you to consider the consequences of your actions. Play out this decision. Fast forward to the end result. Consider all the people and the things that this decision will hurt if you continue to move in that direction. And as we said in this series, we're not just looking at David's successes, we're looking at his failures. He's had some major ones, and I think this one the most significant because it didn't just cost him. It cost the lives of many others. And I think if David could come back and if David could say, hey, listen to me, learn from my mistakes. Don't do what I did. Don't react from a place of fear and loneliness and isolation and anger. Don't let your feelings get the best of you like I allowed them to get the best of me. I learned the hard way, and it cost me and others dearly. And as David would reflect on these moments in his life, he would write in the Psalms in chapter 9, verses 9 through 10, that the Lord is a refuge for the oppressed, a stronghold in times of trouble. Those who know your name and trust in you, for you, Lord, have never forsaken those who seek you. And David said, I felt forsaken, but I was mistaken. God never left me, though I thought he did. He didn't. So learn from me. Don't run from God. run to God. Seek him. He is a stronghold. He is a refuge for those who are in trouble. And when you're faced with fear and isolation and anger, you need to remember, if God was faithful then, he'll be faithful again. David had a moment where he went back in time, where the sword of Goliath is brought to him. And instead of remembering the faithfulness of God in his past, he allowed his fear and his anger and his isolation and his loneliness, he looked right past it. And I think David would say, today I want you to not panic, but pause and pray and ask God to remind you of his faithfulness to you. He was faithful then. He was faithful in your past. He was faithful when you didn't think he was going to come through and you never thought you'd be where you are today, but here you are. Because the faithfulness of God has led you to this place. And he is saying, learn from me. Allow today, this moment, this message, this time online as you're tuning in to remind you that if God was faithful then, he'll be faithful again. That God will finish the work that he started in you. And that God promises to always finish what he started, and that if he brought you to this moment, he will see you through this moment. He is good. He is faithful. And today, God is reminding some of you of his faithfulness, that he is with you, that he will walk with you, that he will see you through this challenging season. But you got to run to him and not from him. That you can put your confidence in God. He sees your future. He knows your future. And today, remind yourself of his faithfulness in your past to give you confidence for your future. If he did it then, he'll do it again. And 1,000 years after this event, a descendant of David is born in the city of David. And this man, Jesus, would gaze into the eyes of some very frightened, scared, alone, abandoned disciples and invite them to come to him. And in Matthew 11, 28 through 30, Jesus gave this invitation to his disciples, and he gives it to you as well today, where he says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you. Learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your soul." For my yoke, my perspective, my worldview is easy, and my burden is light. David would say, the sword should have reminded me, but it didn't. So let me remind you today. God is faithful. He will fulfill his promises. And if he was faithful then, he'll be faithful again. Today, I don't know where you're at and what season you find yourself in, but I know this: God sees you, he loves you, he's with you, and he wants to be a part of leading you into the future. And maybe you've been running from God. Maybe you've been angry at God. Maybe you've felt like God has left you, and today he is reminding you of how much he loves you and cares about you. And God proved his love for you when he sent Jesus to die in our place on the cross. Sin had separated all of us from God, but God so loved you and me that he sent Jesus, the perfect, sinless sacrifice, who died and paid for our sins so that we could know God. And the cross of Jesus built a bridge so you could know your Father in heaven. And God is inviting you, Jesus is inviting you to come to him. And it says, if you will turn from your way of doing things. David was running. Finally, he comes to his senses and comes home. And David would tell you today, come home. Come to Jesus. He wants to help you. He wants to see you through this. He wants to lift that burden off of you and the weight of this world off of you. But you got to come to him. So today, if that's where you're at and you need to come to Jesus, I want to lead you in a prayer as you invite Jesus to take control of your life, as you surrender your life to him and place all of your fear and anxiety and worry on him, casting your cares on him, and take upon his mission and his purpose for your life. If that's where you're at today, just say this real quick. Pray this with me. Say, "Dear Jesus, today I invite you in. Come into my life. Forgive me of my sin. I believe that you're the Son of God. You died for me so that I can live for you. I surrender all that I am to you in your plan. In Jesus' name, amen." If you prayed that prayer, the Bible says you're born again, that you're a new creation, that God is now walking with you and will see you through this season. And we want to help you understand what comes next and how to connect with the Lord. And so I'd encourage you to text the word adventure to the number on the screen there, 94000. And we'll send you a link back there, and you can fill out that card and online just on your phone. And someone from our team will reach out to you and connect with you and help set you up to succeed as you begin this new pursuit of Jesus in your life. And for the rest of you who are watching, part of our Adventure Church family, or maybe you're not, today I want you to be reminded that if God was faithful then, he's going to be faithful again. Don't run from him, run to him. And as Jesus extends this invitation to all of us to come to him, let's cast our cares upon him. Let's continue to be faithful in obedience to our pursuit of the plan of God for our life. And I know if we do that not only will God see us through this, our decisions won't impact others in a negative way. They will do so in a positive way. And we will see God use our lives and our church to continue to reach people far from God and to help them discover new life in Christ. Don't journey alone. We want to encourage you to get in a virtual life group. We are in this together, and we need each other in this season. And so make sure you're following up, getting plugged in, getting involved. We'd love for you to be a part of our Adventure Church family here. So today, as we close out, I want to say again, thank you so much for your faithfulness and giving and continuing to support the mission of God here at Adventure Church. I literally just got off a phone with a missionary in Africa, hearing about the work of God and what they're doing there and just the need for the gospel to be spread in Africa, such a large population, so many different things going on. And he was just so thankful for your support, and I'm passing along from that family and those missionaries a huge thank you and just gratitude for all that you're doing to invest, not just in what God is doing here in Central Ohio, but literally all around the world through your generosity. So thank you for giving. You can give at adventure.church/give. You can text any amount to 84321 as you see that pop up on the screen. And we really appreciate those of you who set up recurring donations. It blesses us and helps us in a huge way. So thank you again for your generosity. Thank you for tuning in today, and we look forward to seeing you next week. God bless you.